My grandmother passed me the flash drive under the table somewhere between the green bean casserole and the second basket of dinner rolls. Nobody saw it. Not my father, who was halfway through his second beer and arguing with my uncle Marcus about whether the new quarterback was worth the contract. Not my mother, who was trying to convince my niece that broccoli was not, in fact, poison. Not my sister Dana, who was scrolling her phone under the edge of the table and pretending she wasn't. The whole house was loud and warm and ordinary, the way a family gets on a Sunday in late October when the food is hot and everybody's talking over everybody else and nobody's listening. And right in the middle of all that noise, my grandmother leaned toward me and pressed something small and hard into my palm beneath the tablecloth, closing my fingers around it with a hand that was shaking. Eleanor Voss's hands did not shake. This was a woman who had spent 31 years as a forensic accountant, a woman who could add 3 columns of figures in her head while you were still reaching for a calculator, who signed her name in the same precise, unhurried cursive on every birthday card she'd ever given me. Her hands were the steadiest things about her. I had never, in 36 years of knowing this woman, seen her fingers tremble, not once. "Don't plug that in here," she said. Her voice was low, pitched just under the noise of the table, under my uncle saying something he shouldn't about the referees, under the scrape of forks on my grandmother's good china, under my niece's theatrical gagging at the broccoli. "Take it home, pack a bag tonight." "Grandma, what are you?" "They're watching the house," she said. "You have 24 hours. Then she leaned back, picked up her water glass, and took a sip like nothing in the world had happened. She looked across the table at my mother and said, "Carol, the casserole's better than last year. I don't care what anyone says." My mother laughed and told her she was just being kind. The table laughed too. The dinner rolled on, and I sat there with a flash drive burning a hole in my closed fist and my grandmother's words drilling straight through the back of my skull. "They're watching the house. You have 24 hours. I looked at her face. She was smiling at my mother, complimenting the gravy being Nana Ellie, the 74-year-old retired bookkeeper who did crossword puzzles in ink and kept butterscotch candies in her purse and had never in anyone's memory been anything more complicated than exactly what she appeared to be. But her eyes told another story. When they found mine across the table just for half a second, there was something in them I had never seen before. Not worry, not nerves. Something older and heavier than both, something that looked like it had been locked away for a very long time and had just kicked the door open. She was afraid. My grandmother, who had buried a husband and beaten cancer twice and stared down a hospital administrator who tried to short her on my grandfather's pension, was afraid. I slid the flash drive into the inside pocket of my jacket. I ate the rest of my dinner without tasting a single bite. I helped clear the plates. I hugged my mother, shook my father's hand, kissed my grandmother on the cheek. And when I did, she gripped my forearm hard enough to leave marks and whispered 4 words against my ear: "Trust no one else." Then she let go, smiled, and asked Dana to help her find her reading glasses. I walked out to my car with the October cold biting through my coat and that small plastic rectangle pressed against my chest like a live coal. The drive home to Maplewood is 20 minutes on a clear night. That night, it felt like crossing an ocean. My wife was waiting up when I got home. She always did when I went to family dinners without her, partly because she liked hearing the stories and partly because she said my family was a soap opera she didn't want to miss an episode of. Priya was sitting on the couch with a mug of tea going cold beside her and a paperback she wasn't really reading, the way she did when she was waiting for someone she loved to walk through the door. She took one look at my face and set the book down. What happened? Nothing. It came out wrong, too fast, too thin. We'd been married 6 years. She knew the sound of my real voice and the sound of the one I used when I was trying to keep something off her plate. "That's not a nothing face, Wade." She stood up. "That's a face you wear when somebody told you something you don't know what to do with. Where's your mom? Is your mom okay? Is it your dad's heart again?" "Everybody's fine." Dinner was fine. I crossed to the kitchen and got a glass of water I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands. Grandma Ellie gave me something at the table, told me not to look at it there. Priya went still in that particular way she had. She was an emergency room nurse, and she had a stillness that came over her when a situation shifted from ordinary to something else, a stillness I had learned to read as the opposite of calm. "Gave you what?" I took the flash drive out of my jacket and set it on the kitchen island between us. Black plastic, no label, the cheap kind you buy in a 3-pack at an office supply store. It looked like nothing. It looked like the most ordinary object in the world. She said they're watching the house. She said I have 24 hours. I heard how insane it sounded the moment it left my mouth. She said pack a bag. For a long moment neither of us said anything. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and gave up. Priya looked at the flash drive, then at me, then back at the flash drive, and I watched her run it through the same filter I'd been running it through for the last 20 minutes. The filter that says my grandmother is 74. Maybe this is the beginning of something. Maybe her mind is starting to go. Maybe I should call her doctor in the morning. Is she? Priya started and stopped, choosing the word carefully because she loved my grandmother too. Has she seemed confused lately, forgetting things? That's the thing. I shook my head. She's sharper than I am. She did the Sunday crossword before the coffee finished brewing. She corrected my dad's math on the property tax thing 2 weeks ago. There's nothing wrong with her head, Priya. Whatever this is, she meant it. Then plug it in. She said not to plug it in at the house. Their house. I don't think she meant ours. Wade. Priya's voice had gone quiet and flat. The voice she used on the worst nights at the hospital. The one that cut through panic. If a 74-year-old retired accountant who hasn't been wrong about a number in her life hands you a hard drive with shaking hands and tells you people are watching her house, you don't sit here debating whether she's lost it. You find out what's on the drive. She was right. She was almost always right, and the times she wasn't, she was wrong in interesting ways. I went and got my laptop from the office, the old one, the one I used for grading papers. I taught high school history, which is its own kind of irony I wouldn't appreciate until much later, and I set it on the island next to the drive. I want to tell you I plugged it in right away. I didn't. I sat there with my finger an inch from the USB port and a feeling crawling up my spine that I can only describe as the sense of standing at the top of a staircase in the dark, knowing there's a step there but not knowing how far down it goes. Then Priya put her hand over mine, and I pushed it in. The drive mounted with a soft chime. A single folder appeared on the screen named with nothing but a date, 11/03, November 3rd, 11 days from now. Inside the folder were 3 files. A document, a scanned image, and an audio file 41 minutes long. I opened the document first. It was a letter typed, single-spaced, 4 pages, and it opened with my name, not Dear Wade, nothing like that, just my name standing alone at the top of the page the way you'd write it if your hands were unsteady and you didn't trust yourself to manage the niceties. Wade, if you're reading this, then I've decided I can't tell you in person or I've run out of time to. Probably the second one. I've been putting this off for 30 years and I'm done putting it off. I need you to read all of this before you do anything, and I need you to believe me, because the easiest thing in the world will be to decide your grandmother is a confused old woman, and that decision could get people I love killed. I read it out loud. Priya had pulled a stool around to my side of the island and was reading over my shoulder, but I read it out loud anyway, because some part of me needed to hear it in a human voice to make it real, and because whatever this was, we were in it together now. You know I was a forensic accountant. You know I worked for the state for most of my career. What you don't know is that for 9 years, from 1994 to 2003, I was contracted out to the federal task force investigating the Callaway Group. I stopped. Do you know what the Callaway Group is? Priya shook her head. Neither did I. We kept going. The Callaway Group looked like a regional construction and development company. Offices in 3 states, a few hundred employees, the kind of business that builds strip malls and pours foundations and nobody thinks twice about. Underneath it was something else. They were laundering money for people who needed it cleaned, a lot of it, from a lot of places I won't write down here, and they were doing it through inflated invoices, ghost subcontractors, and real estate deals that existed only on paper. My job was to follow the money. I was good at it. I was the best they had, which is the only reason any of this happened. The next paragraph was where my hands started to feel cold. For 9 years I built the case against them, dollar by dollar, invoice by invoice. I testified in 2003. My testimony and the documentation I'd assembled put 3 executives in federal prison and broke the laundering pipeline. The man at the top, a man named Royce Callaway, got 26 years. He swore in open court that he would find the accountant who did it. He didn't know my name then. My identity in the proceedings was sealed. I was listed as the financial analyst. For 22 years that seal held. I knew where this was going before I read the next line. You could feel the floor tilting under the sentence before you got to it. Royce Callaway died in prison last spring. but his nephew Del Calloway has spent the last 2 years filing motions to access the sealed records, claiming his uncle's conviction was built on testimony from a compromised source. 3 weeks ago, a clerical error in a document release gave him a name. My name. A friend who still works in the U.S. Attorney's Office called me to warn me. She told me Del Calloway has people. She told me they've been seen in town. She told me, Wade, that they were photographed on Linden Street. Linden Street, my grandmother's street. The house with the blue shutters and the porch swing where I'd eaten 1,000 butterscotch candies and learned to play gin rummy and skinned both knees learning to ride a bike on the sidewalk out front. I set the laptop down. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed, and Priya beside me said the only thing there was to say. Open the picture. The scanned image filled the screen, and for a second I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I did, and I wished I didn't. It was a photograph of a photograph. You could see the slight glare of a flash off glossy paper, the faint shadow of whoever had taken the picture of it. The original showed a house, my grandmother's house. The blue shutters, the porch swing, the maple in the front yard that had been there longer than I'd been alive. It had been taken from across the street, from inside a parked car. You could see the curve of a side mirror in the bottom corner of the frame. And in the margin, in my grandmother's careful ink cursive, she'd written, "This was in my mailbox on Tuesday." There was no postmark. No one mailed this. Someone walked up my driveway and put it in my mailbox so that I would find it. So that I would know that they know. Priya made a small sound beside me, not quite a word. I scrolled down. Below the house photo, on the same scan page, my grandmother had taped a second image. This one was a printed screenshot, a local news article, 3 weeks old, with a headline about a man being granted partial access to sealed court records in a decades-old federal case. There was a photo of him on the courthouse steps. A man in his 40s, expensive coat, the kind of jaw that photographs well and the kind of eyes that don't. Below it in ink, Del Calloway, "This is the man, remember the face." I sat back. I felt the way you feel on a plane when it drops suddenly, that lurch in the stomach where your body understands the danger a half-second before your mind catches up. "The audio file," Priya said. "Wade, the audio." I almost didn't want to. The letter was bad enough, the photograph was worse, and 41 minutes of my grandmother's voice felt like something I couldn't take back once I'd heard it. But she had recorded it for a reason, and I had stopped being able to pretend any of this was a misunderstanding the moment I saw that car mirror in the corner of the frame. I clicked play. There was a hiss of room tone, the sound of a chair settling, and then her voice clear, even the voice of a woman who had testified in federal court and not flinched. "Wade, by now you've read the letter and you've seen the picture, so you know I'm not confused and you know I'm not making this up. I'm recording this instead of writing it all down because some of it I could never put on paper, and because I want you to hear that I'm steady. I need you steady too, so listen." A pause. The sound of her taking a breath. "First thing in the morning, you call a number I'm going to give you at the end of this recording. It belongs to a woman named Diane Ockaffer. She was a federal prosecutor on the Calloway case. She's retired now, but she's the one who sealed my identity, and she's the only person left alive who can verify all of this from the inside. She is expecting to hear from you. I called her yesterday. She knows your name. Do not call the local police. Do not call the FBI tip line. Do not post about this. Do not text about this. Do not say one word of it to your father or your sister or anyone else in this family until Diane tells you it's safe. The leak that exposed me came from inside a federal building. I do not know how high it goes, and neither does she, and that is exactly why we are being careful." I looked at Priya. Her jaw was set. She reached over and paused the recording with one finger. "She thought of everything," Priya said quietly. "She's been planning this for weeks. The drive, the prosecutor, the timeline. She gave you a map, Wade." "A map to what?" Priya looked at the frozen image of Del Calloway's face still sitting behind the audio player. "To getting your family out alive." I pressed play. "Now I have to tell you the part I never told anyone," my grandmother's voice continued. "Not your grandfather, God rest him, not your mother, not a soul. Because the rule they gave me in 1994 was simple. You tell one person, you've told the wrong person, and people die. I believed them then, I believe them now. So if it feels strange that I'm telling you, understand that I waited until I had no other choice." The recording crackled faintly. I could hear underneath her voice the tick of the carriage clock on her mantle, the one that had sat there my entire life. She'd recorded this in her own living room, in the house with the blue shutters, while somebody photographed it from a parked car. When the task force recruited me, I was 43 years old and I'd just been passed over for a promotion at the state office for the third time. I was angry. I felt invisible. And then two federal agents came to my desk and told me I was the most talented forensic accountant they'd seen in a decade, and that they needed someone who could see what other people missed. They made me feel like I mattered. I want you to understand that, Wade, because I want you to understand that I didn't do it for justice, not at first. I did it because someone finally saw me. There was a long pause on the recording. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped lower. The work was slow. It was thousands of hours of invoices and bank records and shell company filings. Calloway built his laundering machine the way a good carpenter builds a staircase, every piece load-bearing, every joint hidden. To take it apart, I had to understand it better than the man who built it. And the better I understood it, the more I understood what the money was. It wasn't abstract. Every dollar I traced had hurt somebody. The clean money on top was sitting on a foundation of the worst things people do to each other. By the third year, I wasn't doing it because someone saw me anymore. I was doing it because I'd seen them and I couldn't unsee it. I realized I'd stopped breathing. Beside me, Priya had her hand pressed flat against her mouth. I testified on a Thursday in March 2003. I wore a gray suit and I did not look at Royce Calloway not once the entire time I was on the stand. They'd built a partition so the gallery couldn't see my face, and they referred to me only as the financial analyst. And when it was over, two marshals walked me out a back door into a car with tinted windows and drove me home to your grandfather, who thought I'd spent the day at a tax seminar in the city. I made him dinner that night. I helped your mother with her wedding planning on the phone for an hour. And the whole time, a man who had just been sentenced to 26 years was memorizing the sound of a voice he was never supposed to hear again and swearing to find the woman it belonged to. The clock ticked on the recording, my grandmother breathed. For 22 years I was lucky. Royce stayed in prison, the seal held, and I let myself believe it was over. I watched you grow up. I went to your wedding. I held your hand at your grandfather's funeral. I taught you gin rummy and I lost on purpose just often enough that you wouldn't suspect it, because that's what grandmothers do. I built a whole life on top of those 9 years and I almost forgot they were under there. And then 3 weeks ago the floor opened up. She stopped. There was the sound of paper rustling. I'm going to read you the timeline now, Wade, exactly as it happened day by day, because I need you to understand how fast this moved and how little time we have left. Pay attention. This is the part that decides whether we live through this or not. I reached over and turned the volume up. Outside, far down the street, a car slowed and then, after a moment that lasted a year, drove on. 21 days ago, my grandmother's voice said, steady as a metronome, a paralegal in the U.S. Attorney's Office released a batch of documents in response to a records request filed by Del Calloway's attorneys. The batch was supposed to be redacted. Most of it was. But one exhibit, a chain of custody log from 2003, listed the financial analyst by a case file initial and a partial employee identification number from my state office. To anyone else, it was meaningless. To a man who'd spent 2 years and a great deal of money looking for exactly that thread, it was enough to pull. 18 days ago, Del Calloway's investigator cross-referenced that partial ID against retired state personnel records. There are ways to do that if you have money and you don't mind breaking a few rules, and Del Calloway has both. By the end of that week, he had a name, my name, Eleanor Voss. 11 days ago, Diane Ackeifer called me. You remember I told you about Diane, the prosecutor. She still has friends in the building, and one of them flagged the record's release and recognized what it meant before anyone else did. She called me at 6 in the morning. I was doing the crossword. She said, Ellie, I need you to sit down. And I knew, the way you know, that the thing I'd spent 22 years not thinking about had finally come for me. I glanced at Priya. 11 days ago, the folder on the drive was named 1103. I did the math without wanting to. The recording had been made counting down to something. 7 days ago, a black sedan parked across from my house for 3 hours in the afternoon. I noticed it because I notice things. That's the whole reason any of this happened, Wade. I notice things other people don't. 2 men, they didn't get out, they just sat. The next morning the car was gone, but the impression of it stayed, the way a chair leaves a mark in carpet. Somebody had been measuring my house. 3 days ago, the photograph appeared in my mailbox. The one you've seen. No postmark, no envelope, just a glossy print of my own front porch folded once down the middle. That's when I understood the message. They weren't trying to find me anymore. They'd found me. The photograph was them telling me they could walk up my driveway whenever they liked. It was a clock starting. Yesterday, I called Diane and told her about the photograph. She did not tell me I was overreacting. That's how I knew it was as bad as I feared. Diane Ackhofer has never once in 30 years told me something to make me feel better. She said the photograph changes everything, that it means they've moved from finding me to threatening me, and that the next move after a threat is not another threat. She told me to assume the house is being watched. She told me to assume my phone is compromised. And she told me to get my family out of the blast radius because Del Calloway is not a patient man and his uncle died in prison 8 months ago, still telling people that the accountant ruined his life. There was a pause, and when she came back, her voice had changed. The metronome cracked just slightly. That's why I gave you the drive instead of telling you at the table. If my phone is compromised, then so is anything I say near it, and I carry the thing everywhere like everyone does. A drive passed hand to hand under a tablecloth leaves no trail. Nobody heard me, nobody saw. As far as anyone watching that house tonight knows, I complimented your mother's casserole and you went home full and happy. That has to stay true for one more day, just one, long enough for Diane to do what she does. The recording hissed, the clock ticked, and then she said the thing that broke something open in my chest. I'm not afraid of dying, Wade. I'm 74 and I've had a good run. What I'm afraid of is them deciding that the cleanest way to hurt the accountant is to hurt what she loves. And what I love is sitting at my dinner table eating green bean casserole and arguing about football. The recording ran for another 9 minutes after that. My grandmother gave me Diane Ackhofer's number twice, slowly, the way you read out a number to someone who you know is shaking too hard to trust their own ears. She told me which bag to pack, small, one each, nothing that looked like we were leaving for good, because a family that visibly flees is a family that confirms it knows. She told me to leave my porch light on its usual timer. She told me to keep the routine of the house intact. Lights on in the evening, lights off at the normal hour, my car in the driveway where it always sat. And at the very end, after all the instructions, after the cold practical machinery of survival, her voice softened into something I'd been hearing my whole life. I lost on purpose at gin rummy, she said. All those years, you probably figured it out eventually. I let you win because I wanted you to love the game and I wanted you to love sitting at the table with me, and I figured there'd be plenty of time later to teach you how to actually play. I was right about a lot of things in my life, Wade. I was wrong about that. There's never plenty of time later, so if we get through this, and we are going to get through this, I'm going to teach you how to really play. And I am going to beat you so badly you'll wish I'd kept losing. Then the recording ended and the room was so quiet I could hear my own pulse. Priya was crying without sound, the way ER nurses cry, the kind that doesn't interrupt the work. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist and said, Okay, what time is it? Almost midnight. Then we have until tomorrow night to do what she said. Diane in the morning, bag tonight. She stood up off the stool and I watched the grief get folded and put away somewhere she could deal with it later, watched the nurse take over from the wife. I'll pack. You stay down here and figure out what we tell people. Because your phone rings tomorrow morning whether you've decided or not, and your mother is going to call, and your sister is going to call, and you cannot sound like a man who plugged in a flash drive at midnight and found out his grandmother is a federal witness. What do I tell them? You tell them we're taking a couple days at my cousin's place upstate. You've been stressed. You needed to get out of town. Boring, believable, the kind of thing nobody photographs. She paused on the stairs. You're good at history, Wade. You spend all day teaching kids about people who had to make terrible decisions fast and with bad information. Tonight you're one of them. Act like you know how the story ends even though you don't. That's the whole job. She went up to pack. I sat at the island with the laptop glowing in front of me and the little black drive sitting beside it like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and I thought about Eleanor Voss. I thought about every Sunday dinner I could remember. The butterscotch candies, the crossword in ink. The way she'd correct everyone's math at the table without ever making anyone feel stupid about it. The way she'd held my hand at my grandfather's funeral, steady, the steadiest thing in the room, while I fell apart beside her. I had spent 36 years thinking I knew exactly who that woman was. A sharp, kind, slightly fussy retired accountant who liked her tea strong and her grandchildren close. And the whole time underneath that, there had been a person who walked into a federal courtroom and dismantled a criminal empire with nothing but a legal pad and a refusal to look away. A person who'd carried that alone through 2 funerals and a wedding and 1,000 ordinary Sundays, and never once let it show. I'd thought she was simple. She was the most complicated person I'd ever known. At 12:40 a.m., a car came down our street slow, headlights off. I went cold. It reached the corner, turned, and was gone. I didn't sleep. I don't think Priya did either. We waited for morning the way you wait for a verdict. I called Diane Akaffer at 7:01 in the morning, 1 minute past the earliest hour that felt human. She answered on the second ring, which told me she'd been awake, which told me she'd been waiting. This is Diane. Ms. Akaffer, my name is Wade. Voss, I know who you are. Eleanor told me to expect you. Are you on a landline or a cell? Cell. Then we're going to keep this short and we're going to keep it vague, and when I tell you to come somewhere, you come and you don't argue, because your grandmother already used up the whole family's argument budget yesterday convincing me she wasn't being paranoid. There was something dry under the steel in her voice, the gallows humor of someone who'd spent a career standing close to bad things. She wasn't being paranoid. Is your family together and safe right now? My wife and I are at our house, my grandmother's at hers, my parents and my sister don't know anything. Keep it that way for the next few hours. Here's what's happening, Mr. Voss, and I'll say it once. The records leak that exposed your grandmother is being treated internally as a serious matter. I still have people who talk to me. As of last night, the working theory is that the leak wasn't entirely an accident, that someone inside the building was paid to make a redaction error and let a name slip. That's why Eleanor told you not to call the FBI tip line or the local police. We don't yet know who's clean, so we are going around, not through. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You're telling me we can't trust the people we're supposed to call. I'm telling you we don't know who we can trust yet, which is functionally the same thing and a great deal more careful. There is one person I trust completely. Her name is Marisol Reyes. She's a deputy U.S. Marshal, witness security, and she does not work out of the office that leaked. I called her at 5 o'clock this morning. She's already moving. She'll be the only badge that comes near you, and when she does, she'll say a phrase so you know it's her and not someone wearing a marshal's coat who isn't one. The phrase is Eleanor sends her regards. Anyone who doesn't say that, anyone, you do not open the door. I wrote it on the back of an envelope with a hand that wasn't much steadier than my grandmother's had been. Eleanor sends her regards. What about my grandmother? She's alone in that house. Marisol's first stop this morning is Linden Street. Your grandmother is being moved before you are because she's the target and you're the leverage, and you protect the leverage by securing the target. A pause. Your grandmother is a remarkable woman, Mr. Voss. In 22 years, I've watched a lot of protected witnesses fall apart, blow their own cover, drink themselves out of the program. She walked out of that courtroom and built a life so ordinary that nobody, including the people hunting her, ever thought to look at a retired bookkeeper in a town with one traffic light. That's not luck, that's discipline, the kind most people don't have. She lost at gin rummy on purpose for 30 years. Diane was quiet for a second, then softer than she'd said anything else. Of course she did. Tell her I said the regards line was overdramatic and she'd have written something better. She'll laugh. A beat now, Marisol Reyes, Navy SUV, sometime before noon, and the phrase, bags by the door, family routine intact, phone on you but say nothing into it. We clear. We're clear. Good, Mr. Voss, one more thing. Her voice changed, dropped the procedure. Your grandmother told me yesterday that the only thing she was afraid of was them hurting her family to get to her. I want you to know that's the one fear I can do something about, so let me. Stop trying to be the hero of this and let the people whose job it is do the job. The bravest thing you can do today is exactly what you're told. Can you live with that? I looked at Priya, standing in the kitchen doorway with 2 packed bags at her feet and Holden's old stuffed elephant tucked under her arm out of sheer instinct, even though we didn't have a Holden, even though the elephant was hers from childhood and she'd grabbed it without thinking. Yeah, I said, I can live with that. Then live with it. I'll be in touch, she hung up. Marisol Reyes arrived at 10:52 a.m. in a Navy SUV with government plates that didn't look like government plates. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with the kind of unhurried walk that comes from people who have trained themselves never to look like they're in a hurry even when everything is on fire. She knocked twice. I looked through the side window. She held a badge up to the glass, unbothered, patient, and waited. I opened the door 6 inches with the chain still on. Mr. Voss. She didn't reach for the door, she just stood there on my porch in the October sun. Eleanor sends her regards. I let her in. She's safe, Marisol said before I could even ask, because she'd clearly learned that the first question every protected family asks is about the person they love. We moved your grandmother at 7 this morning. She's at a secure site about 90 minutes from here. She's fine. She's annoyed, actually. She insisted on bringing her crossword books, and she gave one of my agents a hard time about whether his coffee was decaf. She's exactly what Diane said she'd be. The relief hit me so hard I had to put a hand on the kitchen island. Priya let out a breath she'd probably been holding since midnight. Here's the situation, Marisol said, sitting at the island without being asked, the way people do when they're about to make a room theirs for everyone's sake. We're not going to dramatize this. You've both done everything right. You kept the routine, you kept your mouth shut, you didn't call anyone you weren't supposed to. That matters more than you know. Half the cases that go bad because somebody posts a goodbye message or tells one cousin. You didn't, so we have options most families don't. What happens now? Priya asked. Now you come with me to the same site as Eleanor, you'll be comfortable. It's a working farm, quiet, fenced, nobody for half a mile. Your parents and your sister are next. I have a second team briefing them within the hour and they'll join you tonight. Everybody under one roof, everybody accounted for. That's the goal for today. She looked at me. Then we let the Calloway problem solve itself because it's about to. Meaning what? Meaning the photograph your grandmother found in her mailbox was the worst mistake Del Calloway's people could have made. For the first time, something hard flickered across her face. Surveillance is one thing. A threat delivered to a federal witness's home is a federal crime, and it gave us cause we didn't have yesterday. We have a partial plate from a traffic camera 2 streets over, captured Tuesday afternoon, matched to a rental car, rented under a name connected to Del Calloway's investigator. We have the leaked records, which point at someone inside the U.S. Attorney's office and have triggered an internal investigation that is, I'll be honest with you, a much bigger fire than your family right now. And we have your grandmother's testimony archive, which she kept copies of against every rule for 22 years. Marisol almost smiled. She broke protocol the day she walked out of that courtroom, and she's been quietly breaking it ever since, and it's the only reason any of this is going to work. Don't tell her I said that. So you're going to arrest him, I said. We're going to do this carefully and we're going to do it right because Del Calloway has good lawyers and a clean public face and a dead uncle nobody can put on the stand. But yes, Mr. Voss, the man who thought he was the hunter spent the last 3 days walking into things we can use. The photograph, the rental, the investigator who pulled state personnel records he had no legal right to touch. Every move he made to find your grandmother is now evidence of conspiracy and witness intimidation. She stood. Get your bags, say nothing into your phones, leave them on, leave the porch light on its timer, and when you get in the SUV, don't look back at the house. It's just a house. It'll be here when you get back. I picked up the 2 bags, Priya picked up the elephant. And as we walked out into the bright cold morning toward the Navy SUV, I understood something I'd been circling all night without quite landing on. My grandmother hadn't handed me a flash drive. She'd handed me 22 years of refusing to look away. They moved on Del Calloway 19 days after we arrived at the farm. It wasn't dramatic, not the way you'd imagine. No standoff, no chase. The investigator who'd pulled my grandmother's personnel records flipped the moment he understood the difference between what he thought he'd been hired to do and what the charges actually were, and he gave them Del. The rental car, the traffic camera, the photograph in the mailbox with a partial thumbprint along one folded edge. It stacked up the way my grandmother always said a case stacks up, dollar by dollar, fact by fact, until the weight of it can't be argued away. Del Calloway was arrested at his home on a Tuesday morning. Witness intimidation. Conspiracy. And once the internal investigation finished cracking open the leak, bribery of a federal employee. The paralegal who'd let the name slip turned out to have a gambling debt and a bad decision behind him, and he cooperated, which is how Diane Ockhaffer's much bigger fire got put out. The seal that had protected my grandmother for 22 years was re-established under a new file, locked tighter than before. Marisol Reyes told us, the night before we went home, that in her professional opinion the threat was neutralized. Then she added off the record that she'd never in her career watched a protected witness run her own extraction better than the marshals could have, and that Eleanor Voss had missed her calling. My grandmother, sitting at the farmhouse kitchen table doing the crossword in ink, said without looking up that she hadn't missed anything, thank you, and asked Marisol for a 7-letter word for vindicated. We went home 23 days after the green bean casserole. The house with the timer-set porch light was exactly as we'd left it, my car in the driveway, the mail piled up. The October leaves my grandmother's photograph had captured were gone now, the maple bare. Everything looked the same. I was not the same, and I never would be again. 9 months have passed, it's July now. I'm back in my classroom teaching 10th grade history, standing in front of kids who think the past is something that happened to other people far away with no bearing on the price of anything. Some days I want to tell them I don't, but I teach a little differently now. When I get to the part of any story where some ordinary, overlooked person makes a quiet choice that costs them everything and saves more than they'll ever know, I slow down. I make them sit with it, because I've eaten that person's casserole. I've lost to that person at gin rummy on purpose, the same way she lost to me. My grandmother comes for Sunday dinner every week. She drives herself, of course, because the idea of someone driving Eleanor Voss anywhere is laughable to her. My father knows now. Marisol briefed him at the farm, and he spent the first week furious. Not at the danger, but at the secret 50 years of his mother being someone he never knew. They had a long talk in her kitchen in December that I wasn't part of. He came out of it quieter and kinder, the way you do when you finally understand that the person who raised you was carrying something the whole time and never let you feel its weight. She taught me to really play gin rummy like she promised. She beats me almost every time. She is merciless. It is the best thing in the world. Last Sunday she brought a deck of cards and a tin of butterscotch candies. And after dinner we sat on my porch in the warm dark while Priya did the dishes she wouldn't let either of us touch. And my grandmother dealt the cards with hands that did not shake, hands that had added 3 columns of figures in her head and dismantled an empire and held mine at a funeral and never once trembled until the night she had to. You ever scared back then? I asked her. All those years, testifying. Carrying it, she studied her cards. Every single day, she said. But scared isn't the same as stopped. You can be scared and still notice things, still do the next right thing. That's the whole trick, Wade. That's the only trick there is. She laid down a run of hearts and beat me again. Now I want to ask you something. What would you do if someone you loved pressed something into your hand under the table and told you that you had 24 hours? Would you trust them before you understood or demand the whole truth first? And have you ever discovered that the quietest person at your table, the bookkeeper, the plumber, the one who always lost at cards, was carrying a secret that would have crushed anyone else just so the rest of you could live without its weight? If you have, you know the feeling. The floor opens up and everything you thought was solid turns out to be a surface, and underneath is a depth you never imagined. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reached you, hit that like button and share it with someone who has a quiet person in their life, someone who might be carrying more than anyone knows. Subscribe so you never miss another story. I'll see you in the next one.